We have right now a very successful free trade deal with the United States and Mexico that was negotiated and signed by the incoming American president. So we're in a good place right now. There are questions and concerns around some of the Chinese investments in Mexico, things that I highlighted directly with the Mexican president. But I also pledged that we're going to be there to work to ensure that North American trade continues to stay strong.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau there when asked about calls from both Ontario and Alberta's premiers to cut Mexico out of any trilateral free trade agreements and instead pursue a bilateral one with the U.S. That response comes as U.S. President-elect Donald Trump taps Howard Lutnick as his Secretary of Commerce. Lutnick is going to have a key role in shaping U.S. trade policy in that portfolio, which also has a big impact here in Canada, given the U.S. is our biggest trading partner. So let's talk about that with our front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie are back. Brian, I'll start with you. Let's start on the question of Mexico. The Prime Minister didn't explicitly say, like, we're never going to leave this with Mexico. We got Mexico's back. But he certainly, like, was careful with his words in not saying, okay, like a bilateral trade deal, is a good idea. What do you think of that approach?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this last week. I'm sort of not surprised because obviously I think Canadians are aware and probably hopeful that most Americans believe trade with Canada is a positive for them. And certainly when you sort of go to the polling and when you even sort of anecdotally listen to elected officials in the U.S., it certainly feels like Canada is in a better spot in terms of public opinion regarding trade than Mexico would be. So certainly the idea of raising that by the Conservative premiers as of late was sort of politically savvy to do, but also even from a U.S. point of view, sort of something that could maybe resonate. So it's something to put out there that certainly would have some people sort of nodding their heads yes. That said, as we discussed last week, the Prime Minister certainly would, I think, and Canada official position would want, I think, to have Mexico at the table, of course, and have this amazing trade deal that has been a very positive thing for the three countries and obviously for Canada. So having that walk that line of sort of not completely dismissing it as sort of an idea that's way out there, but not really sort of agreeing with it, and then kind of mildly saying there are some issues that we're going to have to raise with Mexico. And in fact, he's paraphrasing, of course. In fact, I've already raised them. So certainly I think that answers exactly what I would have predicted, and I think my colleagues were sort of getting at last week when we discussed this issue. So obviously, U.S. is the elephant in the room, as they always are. So as much as we want to talk about Mexico, I think there's a lot more to think about and to strategize when it comes to the U.S.
Do you think there comes a point, Tom, though, where the federal government does say we're willing to cut out Mexico?
Yeah, I think that Mr. Trudeau is pretty well there in his own mind, but he's being very diplomatic and super careful. He doesn't want to be as blunt an instrument as Doug Ford. But I do think also, even though I'm a strong believer in free, and I think that the deal that we signed the last time around, the one that Trump renegotiated with Chrystia Freeland, was actually a better deal than the first time out. It got rid of, for example, the investor state provision that gave companies powers over governments. It was a good thing to get. But I also think that the Mexicans have been, cruising for a bruising here for some time. They brought in so many factories from China. They would bring in components. They would build stuff up and then try to get it into the North American market and passing it off as Mexican products. Now, the Americans are not entirely clean about this stuff either, because when John Deere, the tractor folks wanted to build recently a new plant in Mexico, they were threatened in the States because they just don't want stuff leaving the States. So you either have a free trade deal amongst the three countries or you don't. And I think that Canada can probably play the peacemaker here, but I think that Mexico is going to have a mea culpa moment when they realize that they've been playing fast and loose with the rules, because there are rules in trade deals. And if they have been doing that, stretching the elastic too much, the Americans, especially under Trump, are going to react very strongly, and they could wind up sitting on the curbside outside of this new deal. So I don't think that that's a good thing, but I think that continuing with the three countries together is the ideal situation. But Mexico is going to have to own up to the fact that they haven't been playing this.
Rob, I wanted to ask you also about, maybe you can weigh in on that, but also about Howard Lutnick, huge proponent of tariffs employed in the same way that Trump wants to employ them and has pledged to employ them. Seems like another confirmation that they're coming in one way or the other. I know you spend a lot of time interviewing people around Doug Ford. How worried are they about that?
They're very worried about it, Vassy. And one of the things that the Ontario Premier is doing is trying to promote what he calls a Can-Am kind of Fortress Can-Am. And I think that's one of the reasons why he kind of threw Mexico under the bus last week in a surprise move. And no one saw that coming. And interestingly to me, he had a conversation with Prime Minister Trudeau hours after he said that Canada should just do a deal alone with the United States. So it was almost like he was floating a trial balloon for the PM. And I guess the PM rewarded him sort of by giving Doug Ford a cameo in his video that it was released yesterday, the 6-minute immigration video. There's like the only other politician in that video is a clip of the Ontario Premier. So it was an odd kind of backslap, I guess, or whatever. But yeah, I think that would the Prime Minister and the Ontario Premier throw Mexico to the wolves to protect themselves? Yeah, they would.
What do you think about that, Lisa?
So if I were talking to our Mexican friends, I would say what you're witnessing is domestic politics. Alberta, of course, is going to want to align themselves with the United States because a Trump administration is going to be pro-oil and gas reserves, and that's something they like. And I'm sure the Premier likes to dig at the Prime Minister. In the case of Ontario, Doug Ford wants an early election in the spring, and he wants to run against Justin Trudeau. And what a great way to put the Prime Minister on the spot. And the Prime Minister took the bait. What the Prime Minister could have said was, oh, it's way too early to have these kinds of discussions right now. I don't know. We haven't even gotten into the room to have these kinds of discussions. I think that both of these premiers, should just calm down and wait for this to become a matter that we will deal with it. And we will deal with it in accordance with how we normally deal things. And of course, I would consult with the provinces on the matter. But I think that they are just using this opportunity to get the Prime Minister in a position where they can, take advantage of it for their own political needs.
And how do you mean? Like, in what way? Well, you think sort of them relative to Trump type of thing?
Absolutely. So who is going to stick up for you versus Mr. Trump? It's going to be Doug Ford in Ontario. Doug Ford knows what's going on. He's going to make sure Ontarians are protected. And, Mr. Trudeau's still talking about whether or not all three countries are going to be involved. It's just talking past one another. And I think Mr. Ford has the better position on this.
Do you think that, now we've had a couple of weeks of Trump, Brian, do you think that there is domestic political advantage to be had, either at the provincial or federal level vis-a-vis Trump?
For Trudeau, you mean, or for Ford and Smith?
For either, yeah. Like, can anyone gain points basically on saying certain things or looking a certain way compared to Donald Trump?
Well, yeah, of course. You can. That I think is an answer I would give for almost any personality, right? You can go up against people and you can sort of try to feed off of their popularity or the opposite. So yes, of course. And I think in this case, I think Lisa makes an interesting point in the idea that for Ford and for Smith, it might be a way to say, if the talks don't go well with the three countries, they sort of have an argument to say, well, we had a solution. So certainly it's a way to play off of sort of this big, again, use the same word, elephant in the room, and that they're putting out what they think are thoughtful solutions. And frankly, on the face of it, I'm sure a lot of people are like, yeah, that could make sense if we're kind of jammed and we just want to make sure that trade between our two countries stays solid, right? So I think Lisa's right to say that might be what they're thinking. It could also just be that Ford who started the ball down the hill, wants to sort of just show that he's thinking about this and is being thoughtful and trying to provide solutions, because nobody wants to be prepared. To your question, you want to at least show that you're preparing for Trump and what that will mean. So this is a way to say, look, I'm thinking of this. I have some ideas, and we got to be bold and drastic if needed to make sure that we mitigate any sort of negative impacts on the province or country with the Trump administration.
Like Rob said, for their own election. That's going to happen probably in a few months' time. Okay, thanks, everybody. I'll leave our discussion there. I appreciate it. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Our takeaway is up next. Stay right there.